The coach wheels found every stone and rut on the road from Castlebar, each jolt reminding Thomas Brennan why he preferred the steadier railways of England. Yet here, in the green dampness of County Mayo in late August of 1894, the railway was still a promise more than presence. Through the smeared window, he watched the countryside roll past, stone walls dividing fields like gray veins, sheep clusters dotting the hills, and always the threat of rain hanging in pearl-colored clouds. Tom shifted his weight, protecting the leather case that held his most delicate instruments. 20 years of crafting fire and light had taught him that the smallest crack in a star shell could mean the difference between wonder and catastrophe. "Mind yourself there," the driver had warned when loading his trunks. "The road to Thornfield Manor has a hunger for breaking things." The man hadn't been wrong. The other passenger, a wool merchant from Westport, had given up attempting conversation an hour ago when Tom's brief responses made clear his preference for observation over discourse. Now the merchant dozed, his breathing keeping time with the horse's rhythm. Tom preferred it this way. In his experience, people talked too much about things they understood too little, especially when it came to his craft. They wanted the magic without the chemistry, the display without the danger. Thornfield Manor announced itself first through an absence. The wild hedgerows suddenly tamed into proper borders, the random scatter of cottages replaced by orderly tenant farms. Tom knew this grammar of ownership, had seen it from Delhi to Dover. Lord Edmund Ashford's domain spoke the universal language of the landed gentry, control dressed as cultivation. The manor house itself rose from a small hill, Georgian limestone trying to maintain dignity against the Irish weather's persistent assault. Tom counted windows automatically. 42 visible from this approach, and calculated powder quantities in his head. The harvest celebration Lord Ashford had commissioned would need to be visible from every angle, impressive enough to justify the fee that would keep Tom's sister Margaret comfortable through winter. Mrs. Walsh, the housekeeper, met him at the entrance with that particular mixture of deference and assessment that senior servants perfected. "Mr. Brennan, his lordship is attending to business in the village, but sends his welcome." Her Cork accent reminded Tom painfully of home, of their mother's voice calling him and Margaret in for supper. "Your workshop is being prepared in the old dairy, as requested." The old dairy proved ideal. Stone walls, high ceiling, and most importantly, far enough from the main house that any accidents would claim only Tom himself. He spent the remaining daylight arranging his supplies, noting with satisfaction that his London supplier had included everything specified. The sulfur gleamed yellow in the fading light, the charcoal sat black as priest's cloth, and the precious metal salts, copper for blue, strontium for red, barium for green, waited in their sealed jars like painted promises. Young Sean McBride, the apprentice Lord Ashford had agreed to hire from Dublin, appeared as Tom was testing the workshop's ventilation. The boy had clever hands and enough fear to be careful, two qualities Tom valued above formal education. "Sir, there's talk in the kitchens," Sean began, then stopped himself. Tom continued measuring without looking up. In his experience, kitchen talk often proved more valuable than formal intelligence. "There's always talk in kitchens, boy. What variety concerns us?" "The sheep, sir. 3 more gone from the Mulligan farm. No trace found." Sean lowered his voice. "And the lights on the bog," they're saying. Lights that move with purpose, like they're spelling out warnings. Tom finally raised his eyes, studying the boy's face. Sean wasn't given to fancy, which made his unease worth noting. "Bog lights are common enough. Marsh gas, rotting vegetation. Your chemistry primer covered this. Yes, sir, but these form patterns. Crosses, some say. Others swear they've seen letters, though none agree on what they spell. Before Tom could respond, a commotion erupted outside, shouting, running feet, the particular panic that preceded either fire or death. They rushed out to find a cluster of farmhands surrounding something in the courtyard. Tom pushed through, his battlefield training automatically cataloging details. No smoke, no blood visible, crowd fearful but not grieving. In the center lay a sheep, or what remained of one. Not killed by dogs or wolves, Tom had seen enough predator kills to know. This was deliberate, ritualistic even. The poor creature had been arranged, its death made into a message Tom couldn't yet read. "Found it at the bog's edge," a farmhand breathed. "Right where the lights danced last night." Tom knelt beside the carcass, his trained eye catching what others missed. A faint residue on the wool, crystalline, almost phosphorescent in the dying light. He touched it carefully, sniffed his fingers. Familiar, yet wrong somehow. Not quite any compound he recognized. Mrs. Walsh appeared, restoring order with sharp commands that sent the farmhands dispersing. "Mr. Brennan," she said quietly, "His lordship will want this handled discreetly. The celebration cannot be shadowed by such things." Tom stood slowly, his knee protesting. Another reminder of the powder accident that had ended his military service and redirected him toward entertainment rather than destruction. "Tell his lordship I'll need to survey the bog tomorrow." For the safety of the display, of course. The housekeeper's eyes showed she understood perfectly what wasn't being said. "Of course, Mr. Brennan, for safety." That night, Tom lay in the narrow bed of his assigned room, listening to the old house settle around him. Through the window he could see the distant darkness where Blackwater Bog stretched toward the horizon. Once, perhaps twice, he thought he saw a flicker of light there, gone before he could be certain. Evening came early to Blackwater Bog on August 29th, or perhaps the darkness simply rose from the peat itself, seeping upward like water in reverse. Tom stood at the manor's west terrace, calculating angles and distances for his planned display while the sun dissolved into the Atlantic beyond the distant hills. Sean had already marked the primary launching positions with white stones, visible even in the gathering dusk. "You'll want to come inside soon, Mr. Brennan." The voice belonged to Bridget O'Sullivan, the young housemaid Tom had noticed for her unusual habit of actually watching where she walked, unlike most servants who perfected the art of blindness. She carried a lamp, though darkness had not yet fully claimed the grounds. "They'll be starting shortly." Tom didn't need to ask what "they" meant. The very air seemed to hold its breath, waiting. Even the usual evening chorus of birds had fallen silent, as if nature itself anticipated the performance. "You've seen them before, these lights?" he asked. "All my life, sir, though never like these past weeks." Bridget set the lamp on the terrace wall, its flame steady in the still air. "My grandmother, God rest her, she knew the old stories. Said the bog kept its own counsel, remembered things the rest of Ireland forgot." A practical girl, Tom had thought. Yet here she stood speaking of memory as if the land itself possessed consciousness. He was formulating a response about folklore and education when the first light appeared. It began as hardly more than a suggestion, a place where darkness seemed less complete. Then it strengthened, became definite. A cold blue-white glow, hovering perhaps 3 feet above the bog's surface. Tom's immediate thought was phosphine, the self-igniting gas produced by decomposing organic matter. He'd seen similar phenomena in Indian swamps during his service. But then a second light appeared, and a third, and they began to move. Not drifting with wind currents as marsh gas should, but moving with what Tom could only describe as intention. They arranged themselves slowly, deliberately, into a shape that made Bridget cross herself. A perfect Celtic cross, each arm proportional, the circle at its center pulsing with subtle variations in brightness. "Mother of God!" Bridget whispered. Lord Ashford emerged from the house, followed by several others from the household. Tom noticed how the Anglo-Irish gentry stood separate from the Irish servants, two groups watching the same phenomenon through entirely different lenses of understanding. The cross held for perhaps 30 seconds, then dissolved, the lights scattering like startled fish. But they weren't finished. They regrouped, formed new patterns. First, what might have been letters, though too brief to read, then a shape that looked almost like a map, boundaries drawn in cold fire above the ancient peat. Tom found himself counting unconsciously. 12 lights in total, each maintaining consistent brightness despite their movements. His mind ran through possibilities. St. Elmo's fire required different atmospheric conditions. Foxfire grew on wood, not over water. The precision bothered him more than the phenomenon itself. Nature rarely achieved such geometry without help. "Magnificent, isn't it?" Lord Ashford had approached, his voice carrying that forced casualness the wealthy employed when confronted by things beyond their purchase. "Though I confess it's becoming problematic. The tenants grow restless, productivity suffers. I trust your display will provide sufficient distraction." Before Tom could answer, young Sean came running from the direction of the kitchen gardens, his face flushed with more than exertion. "Mr. Brennan, sir, you need to see—" He stopped, noticing Lord Ashford, then continued more formally. "There's been another sheep found, sir. Same as yesterday." The lights on the bog flickered, reformed into something that might have been a warning or might have been chance, then faded entirely. The show was over, leaving only ordinary darkness and the questions it contained. In the kitchen, Tom found controlled chaos. The sheep had been discovered by Molly, the young kitchen maid Sean couldn't stop glancing at, despite the circumstances. She sat pale but composed, while Mrs. Walsh directed the disposal of the carcass. Tom examined it quickly. The same deliberate arrangement, the same crystalline residue. But this time he noticed something new. Tiny puncture marks in the earth around the body, as if something had been staked there temporarily. "It's those as was served notice," one of the stable boys muttered, thinking himself unheard. "The Clearys, the Joyces, day after they got their papers, the lights started forming crosses. The bog's angry at the evictions." Tom filed this information away. Correlation might not indicate causation, but in his experience, human actions often proved more mysterious than supernatural ones. "Sean," he said quietly, "tomorrow you'll help me survey the bog properly. Bring the long poles from the workshop and rope." Later in his room, Tom sketched what he'd seen, trying to capture the precise formations of the lights. His father's brass compass sat on the desk beside him, its needle pointing steadily north, regardless of the mysteries surrounding them. Tom's father had been a locksmith, a man who believed every puzzle had a mechanical solution. "Look for the hand behind the magic, Tommy," he'd said. "There's always a hand." Through his window, Tom could see the bog stretching dark and still. But now he knew it was a false stillness, like the pause between a fuse's lighting and the powder's eruption. Someone had turned the bog into a stage, chemistry into theater. The question was whether they meant to entertain or terrorize. He thought of Captain Hartley's name, which he'd glimpsed in the Manor's guest book from 1891, 3 years ago, before the lights began, before the evictions, before fear took root in Thornfield's soil. A military engineer would know about phosphorus, about controlled ignition, about using terrain to maximum advantage. Tom opened his chemical reference book, running his finger down the entries. Phosphine, chemical formula pH 3, spontaneously flammable in air, producing a bright blue-white flame, created naturally in marshes through the anaerobic decomposition of organic matter. But also, his manual noted, producible through the reaction of calcium phosphide with water, a trick he'd seen demonstrated in Paris by a theatrical chemist who specialized in Gothic effects. The pieces were arranging themselves in his mind like his aerial shells before a display, each element waiting for the proper sequence to create meaning from chaos. Tomorrow he would walk the bog, search for evidence of human craft hiding behind supernatural performance. But tonight, he would listen to the house settling, to the servants' whispered prayers, to the wind moving across the ancient peat, and wonder what story was really being told in cold fire above Blackwater Bog. Morning mist clung to Blackwater Bog like wool to a carter's brush, transforming the landscape into something between earth and water, neither fully solid nor entirely ethereal. Tom set out early on August 30th, his boots already damp from the dew-soaked grass, Sean trailing behind with the surveying poles and rope. The boy had been unusually quiet since breakfast, where Molly had served them with hands that trembled slightly whenever she reached across the table. The estate grounds stretched wider than Tom had initially assumed, encompassing not just the manicured gardens and tenant farms, but wild acres where Ireland seemed to reclaim its ancient character. Here, drainage ditches cut geometric lines through chaos, humanity's attempt to impose order on land that had its own intentions. Tom noted each potential launching site, calculating wind patterns and sight lines, but his mind kept returning to those puncture marks around the dead sheep. "Mr. Brennan!" The call came from their left, where a figure emerged from a grove of stunted hawthorns. Dr. James Fitzgerald approached with the particular gait of a man who'd spent decades walking rough country, deliberate, economical, eternally careful of his footing. He carried a canvas satchel and what appeared to be a collecting net, though what he might be collecting in such terrain escaped immediate understanding. The doctor proved to be that rare specimen, an educated man who didn't feel compelled to demonstrate his education at every opportunity. "Studying the sundews," he explained, showing Tom a small carnivorous plant with leaves that glistened like they'd been dusted with diamonds. "Remarkable adaptations to nutrient-poor soil. They've learned to take what they need from other sources." An interesting philosophy, Tom thought, applicable to more than plants. As they walked together along the bog's edge, Fitzgerald shared his observations about the local ecology with the enthusiasm of someone who'd found wonder in the mundane. "The methane emissions vary with temperature and pressure," he noted. "On warm evenings after rain, the bog practically exhales. Perfect conditions for spontaneous ignition if the gas encounters the right catalyst." Tom kept his expression neutral while filing this information. "You've made a study of it?" "For 15 years now. Started as curiosity, became something of an obsession." The doctor paused to examine something in the peat. Did you know phosphine can be produced artificially? Calcium phosphide and water create quite a spectacular effect. I demonstrated it once at Trinity College, though the smell rather overwhelmed the lecture hall. They were interrupted by the sound of argument carrying from the direction of the manor. Through the thinning mist, Tom could see Lord Ashford in heated discussion with a man in clerical black. Father Doyle, Tom assumed, from the deference other figures showed, despite the obvious tension. Fragments of conversation drifted across. Christian charity, economic necessity, obligations to both God and Crown. Sean, who'd been silent until now, moved closer to Tom. It's about the evictions, sir. Father Doyle wants them delayed until after harvest. Says it's cruel to put families out when they need every hand for the cutting. Tom watched Lord Ashford's rigid posture, recognizing the stance of a man trapped between pressure from above and resistance from below. The landed gentry lived in their own kind of bog, Tom mused, neither fully English nor Irish, forever sinking slowly into debts both financial and moral. They continued their survey, Tom now accompanied by Fitzgerald, who proved surprisingly knowledgeable about the bog's hidden geography. There's an old monastery ruin at the center, the doctor explained, pointing toward a slightly elevated area, perhaps half a mile into the morass. 6th century, they say. The monks chose isolation, built on the only solid ground for miles. Tom studied the indicated area through his field glasses. He could just make out stone shapes among the vegetation, and something else. Was that smoke? No, too white, too steady. Steam, perhaps, from some underground source. He made a mental note to investigate, though approaching would require careful planning. Bogs had claimed more than sheep over the centuries. The survey took them along the western boundary where the Cleary cottage stood empty, its inhabitants already departed after receiving their notice. The thatch needed repair, Tom noted automatically, calculating how quickly rain would claim the interior once autumn arrived properly. In the cottage garden, vegetables continued growing, ignorant of their abandonment. The sight struck him as peculiarly sad. Carrots and turnips awaiting a harvest that would never come. They went to Liverpool, Fitzgerald said quietly. James Cleary had a brother there, promised work at the docks. The children cried when they left. They'd never seen anything beyond these hills. Near the cottage, Tom found what he'd been searching for, more puncture marks in the earth, arranged in a rough line leading toward the bog. He knelt, examining them closely. Uniform depth, consistent spacing, wire stakes almost certainly, the kind used to stretch guidelines for military engineering projects. He'd used identical ones in India when laying out defensive positions. Sean suddenly grabbed Tom's arm, pointing toward the bog's heart. In broad daylight, impossible to misinterpret, a light flickered above the peat. Not the blue-white of the evening displays, but a yellow-orange flame, controlled, deliberate. It burned for exactly 10 seconds, Tom counted, then extinguished as abruptly as it had appeared. That's not natural, Sean breathed. No, Tom agreed silently. It wasn't. But it was chemistry, precise and reproducible. Someone had turned the bog into a laboratory, using the landscape itself as apparatus. The question was whether they meant to prove a hypothesis or perpetrate a hoax. On their return to the manor, they encountered Mrs. Walsh organizing the household staff for the upcoming celebration preparations. She pulled Tom aside with practiced discretion. His lordship would speak with you privately, Mr. Brennan, in his study at your convenience. Tom understood the code. At your convenience meant immediately. He found Lord Ashford standing before a wall of ledgers, each one presumably documenting the slow hemorrhage of his fortune. The man looked older than his 52 years, worn down by the peculiar exhaustion of maintaining appearances while foundations crumbled.
"The display must be magnificent," Ashford said without preamble. "Something to make them forget their troubles, their superstitions. Can you do that?"
Tom thought of the lights above the bog, the precision of their movements, the chemistry behind their creation. "I can give you spectacle, my lord. But forgetting, that's beyond the power of gunpowder." Ashford laughed, a sound like dry leaves rattling. "An honest answer, rare enough in this house." Through the study window, Tom could see the bog stretching toward the horizon, peaceful in the afternoon sun. But he knew now that peace was performance, that someone had turned the ancient peat into a stage for purposes he didn't yet understand. Tonight, he would prepare his own chemicals, create his own controlled reactions, and tomorrow, perhaps, he would venture deeper into the bog, toward those ruins where monks once sought God, and where someone now played at being supernatural.
Tom set out before dawn on August 31st, leaving Sean to continue preparing the firework frames in the workshop. The boy had wanted to accompany him, but some instincts were best followed alone, and Tom's instincts whispered that the bog would reveal its secrets only to solitary seekers. He carried rope, a long pole for testing ground stability, his field glasses, and his father's compass, not for navigation but for comfort, its brass weight in his pocket a reminder of problems that had solutions. The bog at this hour existed in a state between night and day, when mist rose like the breath of sleeping giants, and every sound carried strangely, distorted by moisture and distance. Tom had marked his route carefully the previous day, noting the firmer ridges of ground that formed natural pathways through the morass. Still, each step required judgment. The bog was patient but unforgiving, willing to wait centuries between meals. 20 minutes into his journey, he found the carved stone. It jutted from a small hillock like a broken tooth, gray granite alien to this landscape of peat and moss. Someone had cut letters into its face, not recently, but not anciently either. The Latin was clear, despite the lichen's attempts at erasure. Custos silenti, guardian of silence. Below it, a date, 1891. The same year Captain Hartley's name appeared in the Manor's guest book. Tom was examining the stone more closely when the ground beneath his left foot suddenly gave way. Not completely, the bog rarely claimed its victims all at once, but enough that his legs sank to the knee in cold, sucking peat. He threw his weight onto the pole, using it as leverage while his free foot scrambled for solid purchase. The bog held him for a long moment, considering, then reluctantly released its grip with a sound like a disappointed sigh. "Careless." The voice came from behind him, flat and observational rather than critical. Tom turned slowly, his boots still precarious on the uncertain ground, to find a man watching from atop a nearby rise. Even at 30 yards, Tom could read the military bearing in his stance, spine straight despite rough clothes, weight balanced for quick movement, hands visible but ready. The man descended toward him with the easy confidence of someone who knew every solid spot in this treacherous landscape. As he drew closer, Tom catalogued details. Perhaps 48 years, graying beard trimmed with military precision, clothes patched but clean, eyes the particular shade of gray that suggested constant calculation. This had to be Hartley. "The bog doesn't forgive ignorance," the man said, stopping just outside comfortable conversation distance.
though you move better than most. India? Briefly. Shimla, then Peshawar. Tom kept his voice neutral, professional.
One soldier recognizing another, nothing more.
You've made a study of this terrain. 3 years of study. Hartley's gaze shifted to the carved stone. You can read Latin. That's uncommon for a tradesman. Tom heard the probe in the words, the testing of boundaries. My craft requires chemistry, mathematics, classical references for the educated clients. Knowledge serves multiple purposes. Something in this answer seemed to satisfy Hartley. He moved closer, though still maintaining tactical distance. You're the pyrotechnist. Come to paint the sky for Lord Ashford's vanity? Come to practice my craft for pay, like any laborer. Tom let a trace of Irish accent creep into his voice, the Dublin tones he usually suppressed. Though I admit curiosity about the competing display someone's been mounting over the bog. Hartley's expression didn't change, but Tom caught the slight tension in his shoulders, the minute shift of weight. The bog lights are natural phenomena.
Phosphine, methane. Your chemistry would have taught you that. My chemistry also taught me that nature rarely forms Celtic crosses or writes warnings in fire. Tom pulled the small vial from his pocket, the one containing the crystalline residue from the sheep. And that calcium phosphide leaves particular traces when it's used to generate phosphine artificially. The silence stretched between them like wire about to snap. A curlew called somewhere in the mist, its cry lonely and accusatory. Then Hartley laughed, a short, bitter sound like flint striking steel. Clever, but not clever enough to stay away. He gestured toward the bog's heart, where the monastery ruins lurked invisible in the mist. There are things here that shouldn't be disturbed, Mr. Brennan. Secrets that have waited centuries, perfectly preserved in peat that remembers everything and forgives nothing. Tom recognized the deflection, the way Hartley wrapped truth in mysticism. Archaeological finds, you mean? Like the Scots uncover in their bogs, ancient gold, preserved bodies, remnants of Ireland before the English, before Christianity, before history decided what was worth recording. Hartley's eyes sharpened. For a moment, Tom saw the engineer behind the hermit, the mind that had built bridges and fortifications across the empire. You're more than you seem, pyrotechnist. But that doesn't make you welcome here. The bog has its guardian. The lights serve their purpose. Scaring farmers, driving families from their homes, protecting something more valuable than sheep or cottages. Hartley turned to leave, then paused. Your display for Ashford. Keep it to the manor grounds. Don't extend it over the bog. Some things shouldn't be illuminated. He walked away with the same assured steps, disappearing into the mist within moments. Tom stood alone beside the carved stone, processing the encounter. Hartley hadn't denied creating the lights, had all but admitted it. But his motivation remained opaque. Archaeological preservation seemed insufficient cause for such elaborate deception. On his return journey, Tom took a different route, following the eastern edge where the ground proved firmer. He discovered more evidence of human activity. Copper wire fragments caught in gorse bushes, spots where the vegetation had been burned in controlled patches, even what appeared to be a camouflaged storage cache, though he didn't risk the bog's temperament by investigating too closely. Near the manor grounds, he encountered Father Doyle walking his morning rounds. The priest looked exhausted, his 61 years showing in the deep lines around his eyes. "Mr. Brennan,"
I trust your survey was productive. Educational, Father. The bog reveals different truths to different seekers. The priest studied him with intelligent eyes. Indeed. Speaking of education, I have a proposition.
The church roof needs repair before winter, specific sections requiring controlled removal. I understand you have experience with precise demolition? Tom recognized the request beneath the request, help for the community that wouldn't appear as charity, work that would provide wages for local men without wounding pride. After the celebration, Father, I'll have surplus powder and a need for careful hands to help. They walked together toward the manor, two men finding common ground in practical compassion. Through the lifting mist, Tom could see Sean in the workshop dooryard arranging star shells with the concentrated attention of young love. Molly had brought him tea, any excuse to linger in shared space. The lights trouble them, Father Doyle said quietly. My parishioners. They see portents, divine judgment for sins real and imagined.
I try to provide comfort through reason, but reason feels fragile against fear made visible. Tom thought of Hartley and his bog fortress, using chemistry to create mythology, protecting his secrets with manufactured supernatural terror. Perhaps after the celebration, the lights will cease. Sometimes fear expires when its purpose is served. The priest gave him a sharp look but said nothing more. They parted at the manor gates, Doyle toward his rounds of comfort, Tom toward his workshop where sulfur and saltpeter waited to be transformed into wonder. But his mind remained in the bog, puzzling over Hartley's warning, the carved stone's promise of guarded silence, and the growing certainty that the lights were both performance and protection. September 1st arrived with rain that turned the workshop into a percussion ensemble, each leak in the old dairy's roof adding its own rhythm to Tom's work. He'd transformed one corner into a makeshift laboratory, borrowing equipment from Dr. Fitzgerald's collection and repurposing some of his own pyrotechnic tools. The bog samples sat in glass containers like specimens of disease, dark and somehow expectant. Sean watched from across the workbench, his usual chatter subdued. The boy had returned from the morning market with troubling news. 2 more families had received eviction notices, and the bog lights had responded by forming shapes that looked like gallows. "Mrs. O'Brien fainted dead away when she saw them," Sean reported. "Said it was the banshee calling her name." Tom added a carefully measured amount of sulfuric acid to one of the samples, watching the reaction through protective glass he'd fashioned from an old lantern panel. The peat bubbled, released a thin stream of gas. When he introduced a flame, it burned yellow-green, not the pure blue-white of natural phosphine, but something modified, controlled. Someone had treated this bog material with additional chemicals, turning nature into artifice. "Sir," Sean ventured, "what exactly are we looking for?" Tom considered how much to share. The boy was clever but young, still believing in clear divisions between right and wrong. Evidence that someone has turned the bog into a vast chemical apparatus. "Look here." He showed Sean the crystalline residue under a magnifying lens. "Calcium phosphide, almost certainly. When it meets water, it produces phosphine gas, which ignites spontaneously in air. But natural phosphine burns quickly, randomly. These lights last too long, move too deliberately." A knock interrupted them. Bridget O'Sullivan entered with tea and information, both equally welcome. "Mr. Brennan, you should know. Lord Ashford's been locked in his study since dawn with his solicitor from Dublin. The servants are saying—" She paused, clearly debating propriety. "The servants are saying what, Miss O'Sullivan?"
Tom kept his tone conversational while adding sugar to his tea.
He'd learned that servants often spoke more freely when their betters seemed distracted. That his lordship owes more than the estate earns. That the evictions aren't cruelty, but necessity. That he'll lose Thornfield by Christmas if something doesn't change. She set down the tray with practiced quiet. My brother Colum, he says the tenants would pay if they could, but the yields have been poor 3 years running. Tom filed this away while pretending to study his samples. Economic pressure from above, resistance from below, and someone using chemistry to stoke supernatural fears in between. The pattern was becoming clearer, though the purpose remained obscured. After Bridget left, Tom returned to his experiments with renewed focus. He'd found copper wire at the bog, not just fragments but specific gauges, the kind used in telegraph systems or, more relevantly, in military detonation circuits. Hartley would know such applications. The question was whether the former engineer was protecting archaeological treasures or something else entirely. Mr. Brennan! Sean's urgent voice pulled Tom from his calculations. The boy stood at the window, pointing toward the bog. Even in daylight, even through rain, lights flickered above the peat. But these were different. Orange-red instead of blue-white, arranged in a pattern Tom recognized with a chill. They formed numbers: 3, 1, 8, 9, 1. The year Hartley had arrived. Tom grabbed his coat and field glasses, ignoring Sean's protests about the weather. He needed to see this closer, understand the mechanics behind the display. The rain would actually help, providing the water necessary for the phosphide reaction while also limiting visibility, making investigation safer. He made it halfway to the bog before encountering Dr. Fitzgerald, who stood under an umbrella observing the lights with scientific detachment. Remarkable, isn't it? The doctor said without preamble. I've been timing them. Each number burns for exactly 15 seconds, then 30 seconds of darkness before the next. Mathematical precision. You don't seem surprised, Tom observed. Fitzgerald adjusted his spectacles, water droplets distorting his eyes. I've suspected human intervention for weeks. The correlation with the eviction notices was too consistent. But I thought perhaps the Fenians, trying to stir rebellion through superstition. He paused. Though this seems more personal than political. They stood together in the rain, two rational men watching irrationality made manifest through chemistry. The numbers repeated once more, then faded. In their place, new lights appeared, blue-white again, forming what looked like a map. Tom recognized the shape through the rain, the bog itself, with an X marking the monastery ruins at its heart. It's an invitation, Tom said quietly.
Or a warning?
Both, perhaps. Fitzgerald closed his umbrella, apparently deciding rain was preferable to obstruction. Did you know Captain Hartley submitted archaeological reports to the Royal Irish Academy 2 years ago? Claimed to have found pre-Christian artifacts in the bog, perfectly preserved? The Academy dismissed them as fantasies of a traumatized soldier. Tom thought of Hartley's eyes, gray and calculating, seeing patterns others missed. Trauma could sharpen perception as easily as it could distort it. What kind of artifacts? Gold work, supposedly. Torques, lunulae, things that would rewrite our understanding of Iron Age Ireland. Worth a fortune to collectors, worth more to scholars. Worth enough to kill for, certainly. The lights faded with the increasing rain, leaving only the natural gloom of an Irish September afternoon. Tom walked back toward the manor,
his mind assembling pieces like preparing a complex firework display.
Each element had its purpose, its timing, its intended effect. In the workshop, he found Sean had continued the chemical analysis, making careful notes in the ledger Tom had provided. The boy had promise, methodical, patient, willing to let evidence guide conclusion rather than forcing facts to fit assumption.
"Sir,"
Sean said, looking up from his work,
"I tested the sample from the second sheep. It's not just calcium phosphide. There's something else, something organic. Like someone mixed the chemical with bog mutter, the old compressed vegetation from deep in the peat."
Tom examined Sean's notes, recognizing the insight. Bog mutter would burn slower, steadier, allow for the controlled movements of the lights. It would also connect the display to the land itself, making it seem to arise from the bog's ancient memory rather than human manipulation. Evening approached with the rain finally ceasing, leaving the world washed and somehow expectant. Tom stood at the workshop door, watching the bog darken in the distance. Tonight, he knew, the lights would dance again. But now he understood their chemistry, if not their ultimate purpose. Tomorrow, he would need to venture deeper, perhaps to the monastery ruins themselves. The manor's library occupied the north wing's second floor, a cavern of leather and dust where knowledge sat patient as a spider, waiting for the curious to stumble into its web. Tom arrived early on September 2nd, while the household still struggled toward wakefulness, carrying a lamp, though dawn light was beginning to seep through the tall windows. Mrs. Walsh had given him permission with the weary resignation of someone who'd long ago stopped questioning the peculiar needs of Lord Ashford's guests. The military records occupied 3 shelves in the far corner, bound in regulation red with gold lettering that had mostly flaked away. Tom found what he sought in the 3rd volume, Officers of Her Majesty's Corps of Royal Engineers, India and Afghanistan Commands, 1880 to 1890. Captain Silas Hartley's entry ran longer than most, dense with commendations and technical achievements that spoke of exceptional competence wrapped in orthodox service. But it was the final paragraph that made Tom set down his lamp and read more carefully. Following the action at Maiwand, July 1880, Captain Hartley distinguished himself in the retreat, establishing defensive positions using improvised incendiary devices that delayed enemy pursuit for crucial hours. A footnote, nearly invisible in the page's gutter, added, "Subsequently treated for nervous exhaustion at Netley Hospital. Declined further service, 1885. Tom knew Netley, knew what nervous exhaustion meant in military parlance. He'd seen men broken by what they'd done in service to the Empire, unable to reconcile duty with humanity. Some drank themselves to death. Some ate their service revolvers. And some, apparently, retreated to Irish bogs to guard secrets with chemical fire. "Finding what you need?" Lord Ashford stood in the doorway, already dressed despite the early hour. Dark circles under his eyes suggested sleep had become another luxury he could no longer afford. Tom closed the volume carefully. "Learning context, my lord. The bog lights began shortly after Captain Hartley's arrival?" Ashford moved to the window, gazing out at his domain with the expression of a man watching his own funeral approach. 1891, yes. He came recommended by my cousin in the War Office. Needed quiet, they said. Paid 3 months' rent in advance for the old gamekeeper's cottage, then disappeared into the bog.
We'd see him perhaps monthly, buying supplies in the village. And the lights? Started that winter. Just one or two at first, dismissed as marsh gas. Then they grew elaborate, purposeful. My tenants began whispering about curses, divine judgment. Ashford laughed bitterly, as if I needed supernatural intervention to ruin myself. Simple mathematics and my father's debts sufficed. Tom recognized the deflection of a proud man admitting failure obliquely. The evictions, they're not your choice. My creditor's choice. Each family put out brings another month's reprieve. I'm cannibalizing my own estate, Mr. Brennan, feeding it piece by piece to Dublin banks. He turned from the window. Your display needs to be spectacular enough that people talk of it for years.
Perhaps someone will remember Thornfield for beauty rather than betrayal. After Ashford departed, Tom continued his research, finding references to archaeological discoveries in other bogs: the Gala Man, preserved for centuries in peat, golden torques worth small fortunes, evidence of civilizations that preceded written history. He thought of Hartley, brilliant and broken, possibly sitting on treasures that could solve Ashford's financial crisis, but choosing instead to protect them with terrifying theater. Sean appeared at noon with news that pulled Tom from his scholarly reverie. "Sir, there's been trouble in the village. Someone tried to enter the bog last night. Tim Murphy and his brothers looking to solve the mystery themselves. They came back terrified, swearing they saw soldiers made of fire, heard explosions where there was no sound." Tom descended to find the workshop in mild chaos. Father Doyle had arrived, along with Dr.
Fitzgerald and several villagers, all talking at once. Through patient listening, Tom pieced together the story. The Murphy boys had ventured into the bog with torches and righteous anger, planning to expose whatever trickery was frightening their community. They'd made it perhaps a quarter-mile before the lights began. Not the usual display, but something aggressive, militaristic. Lights advancing in formation, sounds of gunfire without guns, the smell of cordite and fear. "Hartley," Tom said quietly to Fitzgerald. "He's recreated battlefield conditions using chemistry and suggestion." The doctor nodded. "The boys are physically unharmed, but psychologically shattered. They keep talking about Afghanistan, though none have traveled further than Galway." Tom understood. Hartley had weaponized his trauma, turned his memories into defensive fortification. The bog wasn't just hiding archaeological treasures. It was serving as therapy and prison simultaneously. A place where a broken soldier could fight wars that had proper endings. That afternoon, Tom prepared his own chemicals with new understanding. He selected specific compounds: magnesium for brilliant white light that would cut through any phosphorescent display, copper chloride for blue flames that would calm rather than terrify. If Hartley wanted to play with fire, Tom would respond in kind, but with healing rather than harm as his intent. "You're planning something," Sean observed, watching Tom work with unusual precision. "I'm planning to speak a language Captain Hartley understands. Chemistry, soldier to soldier." Tom sealed a special star shell, one designed to burn longer and brighter than anything in his standard repertoire. "Tomorrow, I'll return to the bog. But this time I'll announce myself properly." As evening approached, Tom stood outside watching the familiar lights begin their dance above Blackwater Bog. But now he saw them differently, not as threats or mysteries, but as messages from a man who'd found his own way to survive what survival cost. The lights formed patterns that might have been Celtic crosses, or might have been military formations,
might have been warnings or might have been pleas for understanding. Bridget brought him tea as he watched, standing beside him in comfortable silence before speaking. "My grandmother used to say the bog remembers everything. Every footstep, every secret, every sorrow dropped into its keeping. Perhaps Captain Hartley isn't guarding treasures. Perhaps he's guarding memories." Tom thought of the military precision in those lights, the careful chemistry that turned natural phenomena into controlled display. Perhaps he's doing both.
Sometimes the most valuable things we protect are the ones nobody else would understand. The lights faded with full darkness, leaving only stars and the certainty that tomorrow would bring confrontation or understanding, possibly both. Tom fingered the special shell in his pocket, designed to burn with the pure white light of revelation. Some truths needed illumination to be properly honored. Pre-dawn on September 3rd cast the world in shades of gray that seemed to leach color from everything except memory. Tom moved through the bog with deliberate care, following the path he'd memorized but never walked, each step tested before trusted. The special flare rode heavy in his coat pocket, its weight both promise and threat. Behind him, the manor slept in ignorance of his mission. He'd told no one, not even Sean, understanding that some conversations required privacy absolute as confession. The monastery ruins emerged from mist, like thoughts becoming solid. Broken walls suggesting rather than defining space, arches that framed nothing but air and antiquity. Tom could see why Hartley had chosen this place: defensive position, multiple sight lines, ground solid enough to support permanent structures. The military mind selecting sanctuary with tactical precision. He found evidence of habitation immediately: a lean-to shelter disguised among fallen stones, supplies cached with methodical care, and there, barely visible, copper wires running like veins through the ruins. Tom followed one strand to its source, a collection of bottles and jars arranged with laboratory precision, chemicals he recognized from his own craft, and others more exotic. Calcium phosphide, certainly, but also white phosphorus sealed in water, compounds of barium and strontium, even what appeared to be gun cotton dissolved in ether. "Touch nothing!" The voice came from above and behind, calm as death. Tom raised his hands slowly, turning to find Hartley standing on a broken wall, a revolver held with the steady aim of someone who'd killed before and found it neither difficult nor satisfying. "Captain Hartley," Tom kept his voice level, professional. "Tom Brennan, late of the 14th Foot, briefly attached to the engineers at Peshawar." Something shifted in Hartley's eyes, not softening but recognizing. The gun didn't waver. "Peshawar was after my time. But you know the smell of a place, don't you? Cordite and curry, dust that never settles." "I know the dreams, too," Tom said carefully. "The ones where you've done everything right but men still die. Where chemistry and mathematics mean nothing against chaos." Hartley descended from the wall with an athlete's grace despite his years, the gun now lowered but still ready. Up close, Tom could see the toll isolation had taken. Clothes meticulously maintained but years out of fashion. Hair trimmed with scissors and determination rather than skill. The particular gauntness of someone who forgot to eat when absorbed in work. "Why are you here?" Hartley asked. Tom pulled the flare from his pocket slowly, showing it like a calling card. "To speak your language," To tell you that your secret is known but not threatened. To propose an alliance rather than exposure. Hartley examined the flare with expert eyes, recognizing its composition. Magnesium core, strontium for color, sugar for sustained burn. Elegant work. He looked up sharply. You know about the artifacts? I've surmised. Pre-Christian goldwork preserved in the bog. Valuable enough to draw the wrong attention if revealed carelessly. Hartley laughed, bitter and short. Valuable? They're priceless, irreplaceable.
Proof that Ireland had civilization when the English were still painting themselves blue. He gestured toward the bog's heart. 17 pieces so far, torques and lunulae, a ceremonial sword that shouldn't exist according to archaeological orthodoxy. The bog preserved them perfectly, waiting 2,000 years for discovery. And you've been protecting them with chemical fire? Driving people away with manufactured supernatural fear? Would you have done differently? Hartley's voice carried challenge and exhaustion in equal measure. If Ashford knew, he'd sell them to cover debts. The locals would melt them down or lose them to Dublin collectors. The English would claim them for the Empire's glory. He moved to his chemical apparatus, fingers touching bottles like a musician checking instruments. So I became the ghost in the machine, the thing that goes bump in the night. Better they fear spirits than discover treasure. Tom recognized the logic, even admired it.
But he also saw the cost. A brilliant man reduced to hermitage, trauma transformed into purpose but never healed. The evictions have given your lights new meaning. People think you're condemning or warning. Let them think what they need. Fear is simpler than truth. Hartley turned away, but Tom caught the tremor in his hands. In Afghanistan, I built bridges that were destroyed before completion, fortifications that fell to tribal raids, beautiful things that existed only long enough to disappoint. Here, I preserve, I protect. It's the only engineering that matters anymore. Tom let silence settle before speaking. What if we could protect them properly? Use the harvest celebration as cover, incorporate your lights into my display, make the bog seem blessed rather than cursed. Ashford would declare it a protected area, thinking it holy ground. The artifacts stay hidden, but you don't have to guard them alone. Hartley studied him with those gray eyes that had seen too much. You're proposing theater. I'm proposing chemistry with purpose. Your compounds, my artistry, combine to create something that serves everyone. Ashford gets his spectacle. The locals get comfort. You get protection for your treasures. And perhaps, Captain, you get to stop fighting a war that ended years ago. The sun was rising now, painting the ruins gold and shadow. Hartley walked to a particular stone, lifted it to reveal a cavity beneath. Inside, wrapped in oiled cloth, lay a torque that caught the light like captured sunshine. Gold worked with skill that transcended centuries, patterns that spoke of beliefs lost to history. This one called to me first, Hartley said quietly. Found it my 3rd month here, when I still thought I could simply document and deliver them to proper authorities. Then I realized there are no proper authorities, only competing thieves with different accreditations. He rewrapped it carefully. If we do this, the secret remains absolute.
No reports, no academic papers, nothing that draws attention. Tom nodded.
Agreed. Though I have one condition. Stop the sheep killings. They serve no purpose except to terrify people who have enough fear already. The sheep were accident, not intention. Phosphine poisoning when they wandered too close to my demonstration sites. I tried to make their deaths meaningful, arranged them to add to the effect. Hartley's voice carried regret. Another calculation that ignored human cost. They spent the morning planning, two military minds applying tactical thinking to theatrical purpose. Hartley's knowledge of the bog's geography combined with Tom's understanding of spectacular effects. They would create something unprecedented, a display that merged earth and sky, chemistry and mythology, fear transformed into wonder. As Tom prepared to leave, Hartley asked suddenly, "Do you think about them? The men who died from our cleverness?"
I designed a bridge once that collapsed under enemy fire, taking 30 souls with it. The engineering was perfect, but perfection doesn't resurrect the dead. Tom thought of his own ghosts, the powder accident that had claimed 2 assistants while leaving him with only damaged hearing and perpetual guilt. I think about them every time I mix chemicals. Each display is partly memorial, partly apology. Beauty from destruction. It doesn't balance the scales, but it tips them toward meaning. The afternoon of September 3rd found Tom in Lord Ashford's study, a room that seemed to shrink with each ledger opened on the massive oak desk. Ashford sat behind his financial wreckage like a general surveying a lost battlefield, while Tom stood at the window, watching storm clouds gather over the bog. Between them, the plan he and Hartley had devised waited like an unexploded shell. "You want to incorporate the bog lights into the celebration," Ashford repeated, his voice carrying the careful neutrality of someone checking for madness. "Make them part of the entertainment, rather than opposing it." Tom turned from the window. "More than that, my lord. I propose we transform the bog itself into sacred ground, protected by both superstition and law. The lights become blessing rather than curse. The land becomes untouchable, and your financial situation improves through alternative means." Ashford's eyes sharpened. Despite his troubles, the man's intelligence remained intact. "You've found something. Or someone." "I've found that mysteries often have mundane explanations, and that sometimes those explanations are worth more than the mysteries themselves." Tom chose his words like selecting chemicals, each measured for precise effect. "Captain Hartley has been creating the lights using military chemistry." His reasons are his own, but they align with your needs. Hartley. Ashford spoke the name like tasting something bitter. "I should have known. The man pays his rent quarterly, in gold. Gold coins old enough to be curiosities themselves." He stood moving to his own window view. "What does he want?" "Protection for the bog. Legal designation as a historical preserve, off limits to development or exploitation. In exchange, he'll cooperate with the celebration, even enhance it. And," Tom paused, knowing the next words would change everything, "he'll share certain discoveries with you, privately, discreetly, in ways that solve problems without creating new ones." Before Ashford could respond, Mrs. Walsh knocked urgently. "My lord, Father Doyle and Dr. Fitzgerald request immediate audience."
"There's been an incident in the village." The priest and doctor entered like storm winds, bringing news that 3 young men had attempted to burn the bog, convinced that fire would drive out whatever demons dwelt there.
Hartley had stopped them with a display so terrifying that one boy still couldn't speak, only pointing at the sky and whimpering. "This has to end," Father Doyle said firmly. "The fear is tearing the community apart. Families are leaving not because of evictions, but because they believe the land itself has turned against them." Tom seized the moment. "Then we end it, Father. Tomorrow night, during the harvest celebration, the lights will appear one final time, but as part of the display, explained and controlled. Science revealed, rather than superstition sustained." Fitzgerald leaned forward. "You know how they're created?" "Calcium phosphide and bog materials, triggered by water and managed through copper wire networks."
Captain Hartley's engineering applied to psychological warfare. Tom watched their faces shift from confusion to understanding. "He's been protecting something in the bog, using fear as fortification." "What could be worth such elaborate deception?" Ashford asked. Tom met his gaze steadily. "Ask yourself what would happen if gold was discovered on your lands, my lord. Not a mine, but artifacts, historical treasures. The government would claim them, scholars would descend like locusts, your tenants would tear the bog apart seeking more. The land would be destroyed, the treasures dispersed, and you'd gain nothing but temporary attention." Ashford's expression shifted through several calculations before settling on grim appreciation. "But if the bog were considered sacred, protected by both law and superstition, the treasures remain safe. Selected pieces could be sold privately to discreet collectors when finances require, and the land itself becomes inviolate." Tom pulled out a paper he'd prepared with Hartley. "This is a proposed agreement. Captain Hartley becomes official keeper of the Blackwater Bog Historical Preserve. You retain ownership, but grant conservation rights. The Royal Irish Academy provides a small stipend for maintenance, thinking they're preserving folklore rather than actual artifacts." Father Doyle studied the paper with surprising attention to legal detail. "And the lights? The fear?" "And tomorrow night in a blaze of glory that transforms terror into celebration. We'll stage it as the bog spirits blessing the harvest, accepting Hartley as their guardian, promising prosperity for those who respect the ancient land." Tom's voice carried the confidence of a man who'd turned chemistry into emotion before. "People need closure, Father. We'll give them a story they can live with." The discussion continued as afternoon faded into evening, each man adding refinements to the plan. Sean would manage the ground displays, creating a perimeter of Roman candles that would seem to answer the bog lights. Bridget and the household staff would spread word that something miraculous would occur, building anticipation rather than dread. Even Molly was recruited, her romance with Sean providing perfect gossip coverage for why the apprentice pyrotechnist seemed so confident about tomorrow's display. As the group dispersed, Ashford held Tom back. "This plan of yours, it requires me to trust a man who's been deceiving me for 3 years." Tom thought of Hartley in his ruins, guarding treasures he could have sold but chose to protect. "Sometimes, my lord, deception is the most honest choice available. Ask yourself, would you have preserved those artifacts if you'd known about them 2 years ago, when the bank first threatened foreclosure?" Ashford's silence was answer enough. That evening, Tom returned to the bog to finalize arrangements with Hartley. He found the captain preparing his own chemicals with the same precision Tom had observed in military engineers before battle. Every measurement exact, every contingency considered. "They've agreed," Tom said simply. Hartley nodded without looking up from his work. "The Roman formation will work best. Lights advancing in lines, then forming the Celtic cross as blessing." I can maintain it for perhaps 3 minutes before the chemicals exhaust. I'll time the aerial display to coincide. When your lights form the cross, I'll launch the gold chrysanthemums. They'll seem to crown the bog's blessing with heavenly approval. They worked in companionable silence, 2 craftsmen preparing their masterpiece. As Tom was leaving, Hartley spoke quietly. "That boy, your apprentice, he has steady hands?" "The steadiest I've seen in someone his age." "After tomorrow, if this works, I'll need help maintaining the preserve. Someone to learn the chemistry, understand the patterns. The bog can't guard itself forever, and I'm not young anymore." Tom understood the request beneath the words. Hartley seeking not just assistance, but legacy. Someone to inherit both secret and responsibility. "I'll speak with Sean. He and Molly are planning marriage. They'll need steady work, a future beyond service. The cottage near the bog edge, it's sound, just needs repair."
I could manage that, make it suitable for a young family. Hartley's voice carried an echo of the officer he'd been, planning quarters for his men. The bog would have proper guardians then, ones with reason to stay. As Tom walked back through the darkness, he reflected on the strange alliance they'd forged. Himself, Hartley, Ashford, even Father Doyle and Dr. Fitzgerald. Each man carrying his own agenda, yet working toward common purpose. September 4th arrived, dressed in perfect weather, as if nature itself had decided to cooperate with the evening's grand design. Tom woke before dawn, his mind already running through timing sequences, chemical ratios, and the 1,000 small details that separated spectacular success from catastrophic failure. Through his window, he could see the bog lying innocent under morning mist, giving no hint of the performance it would deliver in 12 hours' time. The manor buzzed with preparation. Servants hung lanterns along the garden paths, arranged tables on the lawn, prepared food enough for half the county. Lord Ashford had invited everyone, tenants, villagers, even the families he'd been forced to evict. "Let them remember Thornfield for generosity," he'd told Tom, "even if it's only for one night." Sean had been working since first light, positioning the Roman candles according to Tom's precise specifications. The boy's excitement was tempered with responsibility. He understood that tonight would transform him from apprentice to craftsman. Molly brought him breakfast, staying to watch him work, their quiet happiness a counterpoint to the general anxiety. "Mr. Brennan?" Bridget appeared with her characteristic ability to materialize when needed. "Captain Hartley sent word. He's ready, but warns the wind is shifting. You may need to adjust the eastern positions." Tom found Hartley's message more reassuring than concerning. The captain was thinking tactically, considering variables, the sign of a professional preparing for success rather than an amateur hoping for it. Tom made the adjustments, shifting 3 launching stations to compensate for wind that would push smoke and light toward optimal viewing angles. Dr. Fitzgerald arrived at noon with unexpected assistance, a quartet of Trinity College students he'd invited to observe a unique interaction between natural phosphorescence and pyrotechnic artistry. Their presence would lend scientific credibility to whatever explanations tomorrow would require. Father Doyle, not to be outdone, had brought his church choir, claiming they'd provide hymns for the harvest blessing. Tom suspected the priest simply wanted witnesses from every level of society. As afternoon surrendered to evening, crowds began gathering. They came cautiously at first, family groups clutching children's hands, elderly women carrying rosaries,
young men affecting bravado they didn't feel. The free food and flowing beer gradually relaxed them, though Tom noticed how everyone positioned themselves with clear paths to retreat, how conversations died whenever anyone looked toward the bog. Lord Ashford moved through the crowd with practiced grace, playing the generous host, while Tom knew he was calculating each penny spent against potential return. The man had aged years in the past week, but tonight he wore authority like armor, determined to make this last display of prosperity memorable. At 8 o'clock, as dusk painted the sky purple-gray, Tom climbed onto the makeshift platform he'd constructed. The crowd quieted, that particular hush of people expecting either wonder or disaster. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice carrying across the grounds, "tonight you will witness something unprecedented. The marriage of ancient mystery and modern science. The blessing of earth and sky combined." He raised his hand, and Sean lit the first sequence, fountains of silver sparks that rose like liquid starlight along the garden's edge. The crowd murmured appreciation, beginning to relax. These were familiar fireworks, beautiful but comprehensible. Tom let them enjoy the comfort before signaling the next phase. The Roman candles ignited in sequence, their colored balls of fire ascending in perfect rhythm. Red, blue, green, gold. Each burst timed to create patterns that seemed to dance with intention. Children pointed and laughed, adults applauded. But Tom was watching the bog, waiting for Hartley's cue. It came exactly as planned. A single blue-white light appeared above the peat, then another, then dozens, rising like souls released from earthly bondage. The crowd gasped, some crossing themselves, others grabbing their children. But before panic could take hold, the bog lights began moving in formation, advancing toward the manor in perfect lines like an army of spirits. Tom launched his first aerial shells, massive chrysanthemums that burst above the advancing lights, seeming to acknowledge and welcome them. The two displays began to interact, each burst from above answered by movement below, a dialogue between earth and heaven that transformed fear into awe. Then came the moment Tom and Hartley had rehearsed in their minds. The bog lights suddenly converged, swirling into a perfect Celtic cross that blazed with intensity that made people shield their eyes. At that exact instant, Tom fired his masterpiece, a shell that burst into golden rain, each spark trailing smaller sparks, creating the illusion of blessing descending from heaven onto the cross below. The crowd stood silent, transfixed. Some wept openly, others fell to their knees. Father Doyle, seizing the moment with theatrical instinct, began singing Ave Maria, his strong voice soon joined by the choir and then the crowd itself. The Latin words rose into the night while fire painted ancient symbols across the modern darkness. The cross held for 3 impossible minutes, pulsing with life that seemed more than chemical. Then, as the hymn reached its conclusion, the lights began to fade, not extinguishing but retreating, moving backward across the bog like spirits returning to their realm, satisfied with the tribute paid. Tom fired his finale, shells that burst into weeping willows of silver and gold, their trails lasting so long they seemed to connect sky to earth. The bog lights answered one last time, forming words in the air that everyone could read. Pacem, peace, but written in flames that made the Latin seem like God's own handwriting.
As the last light faded and smoke drifted across the grounds, the crowd erupted. Not in panic or fear, but in celebration. People embraced strangers, children danced, and Tom heard fragment after fragment of rationalization and wonder. The bogs blessed us. The spirits approve of the harvest. Thornfield is protected now. Lord Ashford climbed onto the platform beside Tom, raising his voice to the crowd. Let this be remembered. The night Blackwater Bog revealed its blessing, the night ancient Ireland and modern Ireland joined hands. The bog will be preserved, protected, a sacred trust for all generations. The crowd cheered, not knowing they were applauding their own deception, celebrating the transformation of fear into faith through nothing more than chemistry and timing. Tom caught sight of Hartley at the bog's edge, barely visible in the shadows, watching his secret become legend. Later, as the celebration continued with dancing and drinking that would last until dawn, Tom found himself standing apart with Dr. Fitzgerald and Father Doyle. "You've done something remarkable," the priest said quietly. "You've given them a story they can live with, peace they can accept." Fitzgerald added, "Though I suspect the full truth is more complex than tonight's display suggested." Tom watched Sean and Molly dancing, young love illuminated by lanterns and possibility. "Truth is just chemistry, Doctor. What matters is the reaction it produces." The celebration continued around them, but Tom was already thinking ahead to tomorrow, when the bog would return to silence and Hartley to his guardianship. The artifacts would remain hidden, the land protected, and the story of tonight would grow with each telling until it became more real than reality itself. Morning came gently to Thornfield on September 5th, merciful to those who'd celebrated until dawn. Tom stood in the workshop packing his tools with the methodical care of a man who understood that every ending was also preparation for what came next. Through the window he could see the bog, wrapped in its customary mist, innocent as Eden before knowledge, giving no sign of last night's miraculous performance. Sean appeared in the doorway, looking older than his 19 years, the way young men did after crossing some invisible threshold from innocence to understanding. "The coach will be here within the hour, sir, to take you to the station at Castlebar." Tom continued wrapping his more delicate instruments. Each piece had its place in the padded case, an order developed over years of travel between commissions. "And you? Have you considered Captain Hartley's offer?" The boy, though Tom supposed he should think of him as a man now, shifted his weight. "Molly and I spoke through the night. The cottage by the bog, steady work, a chance to learn more of the craft. It's more than we'd hoped for." "It's also a secret to keep, perhaps for life. Can you do that?" "Watch people speak of miracles when you know the chemistry behind them." Sean moved into the workshop, began helping Tom pack the remaining chemicals. "You do it, sir. Every display you create, people think it's magic. You know it's potassium nitrate and sulfur, but you let them believe what they need." Wise boy. Tom handed him a leather journal, worn but carefully maintained. "My formulas. Not all of them. A man must keep some mysteries, but enough to continue learning. Hartley will teach you the bog chemistry. Between that and this, you'll surpass us both." Mrs. Walsh entered with a traveling basket, food for Tom's journey to Scotland, where another estate awaited transformation through fire and light. "Mr. Brennan, his lordship requests your presence in his study before you depart."
Tom found Lord Ashford standing before his window, but his posture had changed. No longer the defeated general, but a man who discovered unexpected reprieve.
On his desk lay a small cloth bundle that Tom recognized immediately. "Captain Hartley visited early this morning," Ashford said without turning. "Left this. Said it was the first of several geological specimens he'd be sharing for the estate's private collection. Suggested certain discreet collectors in London who appreciate such specimens without asking troublesome questions about provenance." The bundle contained a small gold lunula, its crescent shape perfect despite centuries in the bog. Tom could calculate its worth, enough to satisfy the most pressing creditors, buy time for the estate to recover. "You understand this is just the beginning. The bog will need protection. Hartley will need support." "I understand that sometimes salvation comes dressed as deception, Mr. Brennan. That truth can be less valuable than carefully crafted fiction." Ashford finally turned, extending his hand.
You've given us all what we needed. Me, financial reprieve. The tenants, spiritual comfort. Hartley, purpose and protection. Even young Sean gets his future. Remarkable chemistry indeed. Their handshake was brief, professional. Two men acknowledging a successful transaction that transcended mere business. As Tom turned to leave, Ashford added, "Your payment is with Mrs. Walsh. I've included a bonus for discretion, let's say." The bonus was generous, enough to keep Margaret comfortable through winter and beyond. Tom pocketed it without counting. Some gifts shouldn't be measured too precisely. He made one final stop before the coach arrived. Hartley stood at the bog's edge, almost invisible in his earth-colored clothes, watching the mist rise like the breath of sleeping dragons. They walked together along the firm path, two soldiers on neutral ground. "It worked," Hartley said simply. "The performance, yes, but the real work begins now. Sean's clever, but young. He'll need guidance, patience." Hartley actually smiled, an expression that transformed his weathered face. "I've been alone with my ghosts for 3 years. The prospect of teaching someone, of having purpose beyond preservation, it's unexpectedly welcome." They discussed practical matters, how to maintain the chemical stores, when to create small displays to reinforce the bog's sacred status, how to document the artifacts without revealing their existence. Hartley had already prepared detailed maps, hidden in cipher that Sean would need to learn. "There are 17 more pieces," Hartley confided. "Enough to fund the estate for decades if carefully managed." But more importantly, they're evidence of what Ireland was before conquest, before anyone thought to call us primitive. Tom heard the passion beneath the practicality, understood that Hartley guarded more than gold. He protected identity, history, the very idea that Ireland owned treasures beyond British comprehension or control. The coach arrived with democratic punctuality, caring nothing for unfinished conversations. As Tom climbed aboard, Bridget appeared with a small package. "For your journey, Mr. Brennan. And," she hesitated, then continued boldly, "thank you for showing us that fear can become wonder if you just add the right spark." The package contained soda bread and a small bottle of poitín, the illegal whiskey that flowed through rural Ireland like blood through veins. Tom smiled at the gift's combination of practical and rebellious, rather like Ireland itself. As the coach pulled away, Tom watched Thornfield Manor recede into memory. Sean and Molly stood together near the workshop, already planning their future. Hartley had disappeared back into his bog fortress. Lord Ashford was probably examining his ledgers, calculating how far one small piece of ancient gold could stretch against modern debt. Father Doyle stood at the crossroads, blessing the coach as it passed, an old ritual that meant nothing and everything simultaneously. Through the window, Tom could see the Blackwater bog stretching toward the horizon, keeping its secrets beneath layers of peat and time and carefully crafted legend. The other passenger, a merchant's wife traveling to Galway, tried to engage Tom in conversation about the miraculous lights that had blessed the harvest at Thornfield. He listened to her version, already embellished beyond recognition, and made appropriate sounds of amazement. By the time the story reached Scotland, it would involve angels and divine intervention, perhaps a miracle healing or two. Tom pulled out his father's brass compass, watched the needle find north with its eternal certainty. His father had believed every lock had a key, every puzzle a solution. Tom had learned something different, that sometimes the puzzle was the solution, that mystery could protect better than walls, that chemistry could create faith as easily as fear. He thought of all the displays he'd created over 20 years, each one a temporary constellation of light against darkness. Last night's had been different, though, not just entertainment, but transformation, using fire to rewrite the story of a place and its people. The bog would keep its secrets, Sean would have his future, Hartley his redemption, and Lord Ashford his salvation. As for Tom himself, he had what he'd always had, the road ahead, another commission waiting, chemicals that promised wonder if properly combined. But now he also carried the knowledge that his craft could do more than dazzle. It could heal, protect, transform. Light was just oxidation accelerated, but meaning was whatever the viewer needed it to be. The coach rolled on through the morning, leaving County Mayo behind, but carrying its story forward. Tom closed his eyes, already planning his next display. But part of him remained at Blackwater Bog, where ancient gold slept beneath the peat, and 2 broken soldiers had used chemistry to turn fear into faith, deception into truth, and fire into blessing.